So when you do a first test and you get a really good result or a really bad result as well, it means you hit something that's sensitive to the customer, sensitive to it. And then uh, from that point on, you should focus on that and try to get the best out of it until you
Right.
don't have any more results. When the results are similar to neutral or nothing, then you throw away that hypothesis and get a new one.
Hey, Experiment Nation. Anthony here from eNavi. I will be your podcast host today. I'm excited to be talking to Eduardo from Magalu as we dive into many things from his experience. I'll let him introduce himself because he'll do it much better than I will. So, Eduardo, tell us about yourself.
Okay, thank you very much, Anthony, for the invite, for the conversation. I'm very pleased to be here. It's my first time here at Experimentation. Well, my name is Eduardo Marconi. I am a CRO practitioner since 2011. Um, did a bit of everything inside the area. So I worked in an agency. I worked in-house for a big company in consultancy as well. And then on 2019, I decided to open my own agency. And then I stayed with this agency for 2 years. It was called Juni. And then it was acquired by Grupo Magalu, which is a big retailer here in Brazil. And then from then on, now I am the CRO director for the whole group, and the teams, the experimentation teams that I work with, attend all the brands within the group here.
So, how did you get into CRO? Like, I know you started in marketing, right? So, how did you actually get into experimenting and CRO?
So yeah, it was a funny story. It was by chance. Like I never heard of it before. I was an illustrator. I was working in London. Uh, Worked with a bit of everything over there in agencies. And then when I decided to move back to Brazil, I got to know this first startup. It was like just a project that was beginning at the time. They were in contact with some tools in Israel and bringing those tools over to Brazil. And my job was to build a methodology that we could work on using those tools. And in some of those tools was an A/B testing tool and a heat map tool. So we started with these both tools, offering to clients a service of trying to improve their conversion rate. It was not even called CRO at the time. Had few articles, few documentation about the subject, and then, but we found out that the clients that we were talking to were very interested in and knowing more, to know more about the consumers and the users there. And that's how it all started. So we was what we usually say here in Brazil is like opening a lot of areas because nobody haven't heard of it before. And then but yeah, was quite interesting. Was good times there, trying to make people to understand what we were doing when we even us didn't have a clear idea on
Right.
what the service was.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's how CRO in general, just kind of a lot of people can have a similar experience to that. There's no like educational background, like especially when you look back 10 plus years ago, like CXL didn't exist, at least as far as I know, at least not to the scale that it's at now. And so a lot of it was kind of stumbling in there and then learning as you go, which I think is really cool because we've seen a lot of people get to the same place in terms of their thought pattern when it comes to CRO, but we've also seen like other differing beliefs on how to approach things, and so it's really
Yeah.
interesting how CRO and how that's changed and shaped over the years. One question I did have was, and you might know this, but I've noticed that there's a lot of CRO experts and agencies in Brazil. It seems to be kind of like um, a hot industry, I guess, in Brazil. And I don't see that in like other South American countries. Do you know why that is?
Not really, to be honest, but like what I see is that a lot of companies they actually they look for to understand more the consumers, and because Brazil is so big and we have very different barriers depending on the region that they are, and then cultural as well differences among the population. Maybe this is something that interests them, especially to grow in specific areas. So
Right,
what I found over these years is that yes, over here the community, the Brazilian community is growing. I think we are hunger for knowledge. Even having a lot of people entering the area, we still don't have here in Brazil a lot of talks, summits, or I don't know, workshops about CRO. So it's something that is new, and we have to look up for knowledge, for references abroad. So I think
right,
that's other reason as well that maybe we are seeing a lot of people from Brazil coming into international events or like to uh, signing up for content and so on because we lack of this knowledge internally here over here and even
right,
uh, and this was something that when we opened the agency was something that we missed a lot because we didn't have people that knew the area and also that was interested on doing so. And but even being like one of the pioneers here, I think we didn't do a good job of of trying to build like an institution, like something like CXL excelled in that, like in terms
right,
of building content, like opening up like a community, talking, and uh, so things were always very isolated over here. I think
right,
that nowadays I started to see some people like already discussing it, some groups. So yeah, I'm very happy from uh, where we are going to. Like I think I can see like an improvement, a huge improvement on that. But I think we still miss a little bit of that, you know, like to be closer to the big CRO international community.
yeah. And I would say that it's very similar in the U.S. And just in general in the CRO world. There is these pockets where it's very similar the way that they think about CRO. So you have that like CRO, that CXL pocket where there's varying approaches, but it's very similar the way that they think about CRO. What I would call like true CRO. But then we have like these other pockets of full service agencies or like uh, sometimes even a CRO agency where they say they do CRO, but it's not really CRO. Like it lacks the research aspect. It's mostly just kind of like throwing up ideas and guessing. And we see that a lot. There's like this mainstream CRO, and then there's the CXL version of CRO that, um, at least in the ecom industry and Shopify, where I spend a lot of time, there's a big difference between the way the merchant talks about CRO and like CXL talks about CRO. So it's really interesting to see something that's really new across the board, no matter where you're at. It's still fairly new. There's no like it's not like you know other you know marketing. You can go in and you can actually get education in college. You can dive into those areas and actually get a university education. You can't get that with conversion optimization. So it's so new, like experimentation, all of that is still so very young. It's going to be interesting to see how it changes over time, and if that like mainstream. at least in the ecom space, starts to shift as they become more familiar with the CXL and the true CRO approach that is very time consuming. Like research is time consuming. It's a lot easier to throw up ideas that don't come out of research, that are just kind of like guessing, than it is to spend time doing quantitative and qualitative analysis to find problems and then identify solutions through through more research. And so that's one thing that I'm seeing here in the U.S. I'm sure you're probably seeing that in Brazil, is like these different pockets that are forming, because there's not like a because it's so young and so many people are kind of learning it on their own, isolated. It creates these different approaches, which is both good. There's positives and negatives to it.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a process, right? I think we're at the beginning of
Right.
the area, I don't know, path.
Yep.
So I think it's common to have a lot of people saying different things
Yep.
with different levels of knowledge
Yep.
until we get to a point that people understand what it is about the service,
Yep.
the core of it, and then it'll be
Yep.
easier for people uh, to get the knowledge, like people to who hire as well to the service as well to understand what were hiring. I think it changed a lot over the years from where we when we started. From now, it's completely different over here in Brazil.
Yep.
When we started, we didn't know even what an A/B test was, what a heat
Right.
map was. So everything was new. Nowadays, you have to explain in details what you're going to do, how you're going to do your research, what sort of analysis you will do, what kind of tools that you need to use. So uh, the questions got deeper, which is good. I think it's awesome for the area that the who hires has like the knowledge to discuss the service. It makes much
Right.
easier. Competitive competition increase,
Right.
but that's good. That's also good because it means that people are finding it important to
Yep.
to have the service and to discuss the area.
Right. As you've been a part of the, learning, right, kind of learning on the job about CRO and like getting, familiarized with those tools and learning how to do them without like a formal education. When you look back, what are some of those like biggest mistakes that you made, or like the biggest mistake that you made where you look back and you're like, I can't believe like that's how I thought I should approach it, or that I thought that was true, where now you're like completely on the opposite end. Is there anything
Yeah,
in particular that you can recall?
yeah, we have some funny stories about that. Like I think the first one was when we we signed the first tool to try to sell over clients. It was something completely new. We understood it. We signed from a company from Israel, so had a lot of language barriers as well on the discussions. And the way we understood the A/B testing tool was something that you could personalize.
This is Romo Santiago from Experiment Nation. Every week we share interviews with and conference sessions by our favorite conversion rate optimizers from around the world. So if you like this video, smash that like button and consider subscribing. It helps us a bunch. Now back to the episode.
Product by product on 24/7. You check like every hour what was the sales curve of that product, and you could swap it using the tool. And then we actually sold like a contract, a huge contract here for a big company on that way, like on that matter, like of the contract. And of course, we couldn't deliver that because it's impossible to do that manually. Have a lot of people just changing products and evaluating like 1 hour curves of sales to find results. So that was a huge mistake. And we had to review contract and everything. Like was like a mess, but in the end, was a big learning of like what was the uh, well how we could use the tool itself. And I think the other one that at the beginning was very hard, people didn't understand as well the tool, and they asked us to do like bigger changes on websites. So when the discussion over here of e-commerce is being responsive, like to have like a mobile site apart from a desktop, this I don't know 7 8 years ago, they most of the platforms, e-commerce platforms, didn't have uh, a mobile site version of it, and clients was asking us to build this inside the A/B testing tools because we could change all the front end, and we actually did a few of those. That as well consumed a lot of time, a lot of energy, with like very little results in terms of that. It was just like for them was an opportunity to do a shortcut in terms of solving a bigger problem that they had. That
Right.
was the platform being like mobile. So yeah, that was another big mistake. That if you would go back, I'll definitely say no, don't go that way because
Yeah.
uh, we lost a lot of like good sleep hours and stress to try to solve that inside a A/B testing tool, which is definitely not the purpose of the tool.
Yeah, definitely. What's been the most like impactful thing that you've learned in your journey?
Uh, I think is the methodology, like the problem solution mindset of things. I think that's very interesting and it applies for everything in life, to be honest. But I never thought on that way before entering the CRO area, because even now that we have a lot of data, we have a lot of information, and to
Right.
decide things, we always have to go back to the problem, to the origin of everything that we are doing, and
Right.
uh, and to build the best solutions. And I think that was the most important thing that over the years we learned, and it's impressive how much if the more uh, purpose you have like on what you are doing, like what problem you want to solve, like the premises of this and like the idea behind of it, uh, the more uh, clear they are, yeah, then it's impressive how the arguments to the decision, like, oh, that's the test that we need to run, and like the results afterwards, closer to get like good results, like and learnings. It's impressive. Like so, I think
Right.
that's the key lesson that I learned over the years.
Yep. So always go back to the problem.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really easy, especially as you do more research, to get caught up in all of the different things that you're learning and insights from that. But uh, viewing that through the lens of the problem is the way that you can make the most impact
Yeah.
from a testing standpoint. Right.
Exactly. And when you work for big companies, you have to talk to a lot of people to publish something.
Right.
There are a lot of specialized areas. So if you want to talk about shipping, the A/B testing for shipping, you go through, you understand what they're doing, like what's the core of the wanna do. But then you have to also talk to the design team. You have to talk with the data team. You have to talk with a lot of people, branding sometimes, like decide like the copywriting and so on. So the, it also gives you as well when you start to discuss ideas, new data that make you change the path of the things that you are doing. So you don't have like a core, like a problem and a purpose of what you want to do. It's very easy to divert from your original idea and do
Right.
something completely different, which is not solving any problem for the final
Right.
user. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's something that you have to be careful because it's very easy to get misled in terms of that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can go down so many different tangents and get inundated with a bunch of different priorities or problems that aren't even might not even be related to the core problem that you're trying to solve or your most important priority at that given moment. And it can be so easy to then get spread thin across a bunch of things, and your research and the value you're providing ultimately is limited, right? Because you can only go so deep when you've got a bunch of different tangents that are filling up your insights backlog or your mind ultimately. That's so true. That's something that I've like learned over the years too, is making sure that you go back to the problem, that you're focusing in on that particular problem and not getting caught up in these other problems or shiny objects that come in, because it's just far too easy to do that.
Yeah.
So having that priority, that problem that you're solving, is so key. So I want to dive into Magalu and some of the work that you do there. So if you could introduce Magalu um, and familiarize them with kind of who Magalu is, and then we can dive into like Magalu's service offering when it comes to trade marketing CRO,
Yeah.
and learn a little bit more about that. Yeah.
Sure. So Magalu is a retailer company. Has been over 60 years now old. It has like more than 1,000, and it's almost 1,400 stores all over Brazil. And then it's the second biggest e-commerce here in Brazil. So it's local. We are not an international company. We are focused on in Brazil. It started as an electronic home appliance store and moved now, and we are one of the biggest marketplaces in Brazil. So in terms of companies that are similar, I would say, like, of course, the most famous e-commerce, Amazon. It's very similar offer that we have there. But Magalu also has like a very big purpose. I think that they always say that they wanted to give access to all what is a privilege to few, like here in Brazil. So like how they can offer things, how they can work throughout the whole system ecosystem of retailers, sellers, clients. Um, and then which makes like also a company with like very big purpose around over here in the area. Uh, to and also one another thing that's important to say, that we have like our mothership that we call like that's Magalu, that's the biggest brand, that's the most famous one. But we also have inside the group another brands that are specialized and leaders inside their area. So, for instance, we have like Netshoes. That's the most like the biggest sports e-commerce that has in Brazil. Época, which is like the same for beauty, and also Estante Virtual. That's the same for books, and Zatini, which is like a fashion brand as well over here, like a website that sells all about fashion, like a lot of different brands. It's a multi-brand store. So we have like the general, like that sells everything, and also the specific websites that are to specific categories as well, which makes very interesting the CRO job here, because you have both words that you can work with internally. And then when Juni, that was my company, was acquired, we don't sell to the market anymore. We are internals there. We are in house like area that work for the all brands that's inside the Magalu group. At that moment, they didn't have like a very structured experimentation program. They had like some initiatives inside the brands, but was not something spread throughout the whole group. And then and that's our plan. That's our strategy here now, to build like a program to all the brands, to all the companies that we have there. Uh, and then about trade CRO, this is one of the services that we do. Uh, we we work with different areas internally, and we have one specific part of our department here that is the only one that we sell to the market. That's the what we call CRO for trade marketing, which is instead of us being our first players here inside our site and doing tests, we offer to industries to come to Magalu and then build an experimentation program internally inside Magalu. So it's like a third party being able to do experiments inside our brands. And the idea is that we play that by category. So each department inside the brands, they can have like one captain, which is a brand that will be responsible together with us to build an experimentation roadmap to the brand or the category itself. So depending on the program, for instance, like if you have like a type of product that we don't sell a lot in our stores, they could hire that to improve the sales of the whole department from then on to build like a brand relation with the users. So it's something that can be done as well. And then the idea, so this captain, they can work for the awareness of the category or the performance of the brand. It's up to them, and they can do both. And sometimes they do both. Like they work in different strategies internally there to build up their brand market share and so on. This captain, they can define the roadmap together with us in terms of that. So, and our responsibility is to be like a branch of them, being like an outsider inside the Magalu, but also discussing the strategies that they are doing internally with the Magalu teams as well. So we're like a neutral area that attend both worlds. That definitely sometimes they collide in terms of that because of different interests. But our plan is obvious to build a win-win strategy for the brand to increase their market share, their sales, and us to increase our overall sales, the department share internally as well. So that's the CIO trade offer, like in
Right.
big picture there. So, but to do the experiments, we go back to the problem. So we have to do research as well for this user.
Right. Right.
In the end of the day, what we are building to them is like a full CRO program where we will run the researches for them. So that can be like surveys, that can be like just like heat map studies, can be a lot of things that they want. User testing of their page. We understand how the brand is seen by Magalu users, clients, and their opinions, their navigational data. And then from there on, we build strategies for them. And that strategies could be to launch a new product, increase market share, or maybe to improve their content, or reduce costs. So we had some examples of like industries that, for instance, they wanted to know because they have to build like 6 images for their product page. And to build that images, they spend a lot of money in studios. So like, but does it make sense to have 6 photos? Maybe with 4 images, they'll have the same result. Maybe they need 10 images. So what's the right amount of images that you need to make more sales in terms of the product? And that's something that we could help them with. And then and even to reduce costs. Look, you are spending too much because you don't need 5, 6. You can do the same job with 3. And maybe that's okay for them. So that's something that we have seen a lot as well, which is quite interesting because it's something that we were not used to analyze and and to define as a priority in terms of A/B testing for us.
So obviously with Magalu, that's a very unique situation where um, you're working with brands that are selling through your site to improve their product listings and learn more about their consumers, and ultimately the branch of their consumers that are shopping on Magalu. But in other contexts, like for other brands that maybe aren't selling through Magalu or CRO agencies that don't have this type of service, what are some things that they can extract from this process, or uh, some ways that they could utilize some of the research that you do or insight gathering that you're able to do, that they could then utilize it in, with their brand or with the brands that they work with.
I think it's important to stress that like this program, this software, it didn't start inside Magalu. I was actually offering that when I had my agency before. So I would go to industries and knock on their door and say, look, uh, how much data do you have of your user inside the point of purchase, inside the e-commerces? I know that you have data from your e-commerces, but what about other players that you sell them? And I got surprised that they have almost no data. They don't have any information unless what they receive from these retailers, which usually is not much because the retailers don't have like big teams to do the service for the industry internally. So I came up with this idea to build this program. Say, look, why don't we go together and knock into the retailers and offer them a service that I would play the neutral as like an outside company that have like uh, not like a specific interest in terms of getting to know their data in total and the things. And I will do the middleman job. So like I will build the roadmap, build the tests, and then the company, the retailer could give me access to the data, and I'll have a contract with them that I will only share whatever they let me share in terms of that. So that was very interesting. And it worked a lot. I found out that uh, the industries that helped me to get into a lot of retailers because of the industry. They already had the contacts, they already have uh, the, the the relationship with the companies, and they were open to do that kind of service. So that was interesting. So for agencies, I think it's an offering. It's a different type of offering that can be done. For in-house departments, for CRO, it's a different point of view. Because when you are an in-house, your main responsibility is about the platform itself as a CRO. So you try to understand how to improve the performance of the platform. So you're looking for navigational paths, for content, maybe buttons, maybe like the structure of the pages, and so on. But then, especially on big retailers as Magalu or other companies that you sell everything, right? You're not specific into one product, and you have to sell a lot of things. So you don't get deep inside like a way in a product-based perspective. So and that helps a lot because when the industry comes, they are always passionate about their products. They love what they sell. They come and they know a lot about their products, their features, their benefits, the best angles that you should expose the products, and so on. But us as retailers, we don't look as much as one specific brand on that product. So in the end of the day, when we started to learn those different perspectives, it gave us a completely different overview of things that we could do inside a product page, inside
Right.
a organic search page. So that's very interesting. and it's a different kind of A/B testing that we do. It's a different kind of roadmap,
Right.
which is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool. It's honestly a genius idea that you had there to take that into um, to partner those brands with the retailers that they're selling on, and ultimately work with them to sell more on those retailers. That's something that I haven't seen here in the U.S. It probably exists, and maybe I'm not familiar with it, but really cool concept there. I think quite interesting. So I'd assume you then at some point in time connected with Magalu and started doing that with Magalu, and then Magalu was like, "Let's bring this in house," and that's kind of how that happened.
Well, for Magalu itself was not the case. I was talking with some companies at the time inside this trade area, but was a different story in terms of like the acquisition and everything. But it gave me opportunity to get to know a lot of companies by the industry perspective. That was nice. And one of the companies from Magalu Group, that's Epoca, is a beauty company, like the beauty category. We were working with an industry from that beauty category that one of their uh, biggest goals was to do CRO for this specific brand. And then when I came to Magalu now, of course, that makes it easier to contact, to talk, and so on. But yeah, uh, it's it's a good opportunity in terms of that, and to get to mix both words. And whenever you are doing a good job, that could happen as well. Maybe sometimes the retailer said, "Oh, that's nice. What you are doing here for the industry is quite nice. Don't you want to do it for us as well, or do you want to help our team to improve our uh, our strategies here?" So that opened me
Right.
doors as well. In terms of that.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So one of the things that I think is really interesting about your experience is um, the fact that you've worked in an agency, you worked as a consultant, you ran your own agency, now you're in house, at Magalu working with multiple brands at a very large company. Uh, and so that's your career path's really cool. There's a lot of different roles that you filled, which I think is there's a lot of insight that we could pull from that. Uh, in that, both working in house and as an agency owner, what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned through that?
Mhm. Uh, I'd like to ask you a question because I think it's important. Uh, can you give me an example of something you did for the first time in your life that you excelled on it?
That I was excellent on it.
Mhm.
Not a whole lot.
I I ask this question to all my prospects, clients, to everyone. I think the only answer that I thought, okay, that's fair, was our children, right? Like the children, the first time you do them, you excel them the first time, yeah. But apart from that, it's very rare for you to excel on something when you do it for the first time. So
Right.
why do you think we think the same for our hypothesis? I got a view after all these years that hypotheses are like fruits when you want to make a juice. So you squeeze the fruit for the first time. Depending on how much juice you get out of the fruit, you keep squeezing until
Right.
you get to a point that's no more juice on the fruit. Then you throw it away and you get a new fruit. For me, the hypotheses have the same principle. Uh, so when you do a first test and you get a really good result or a really bad result as well, it means you hit something that's sensitive to the customer. sensible to do it. And then uh, from that point on, you should focus on that and try to get the best out of it until you
Right.
don't have any more results. When the results are similar to neutral or nothing, then you throw away that hypothesis and get a new one. So it
Right.
took me a long time to understand that in terms of it and to sell that to my customers as well when I was an agency. Because it's very easy for you to build like a huge roadmap with a lot of things on it, and you don't open space to retest it, to
Right.
go deeper, to
Yep.
understand the user. And I did some uh, analysis later on to try to understand where were my biggest results, my bullets, silver bullets, like results
Right.
that you see, right? And in the end of the day, they were never from the version one of an hypothesis. They were from the version two, version three, version four sometimes,
Right.
because that's the mindset. That's the incremental logic of it. And you
Right.
learn from your tests. I think more important than getting like a result is to get the learnings from it and knowing what to do with that learnings and have room to apply the learns into that to the platform again, like to roll out again that for the users, for you to get and to know if they were actually true or not in terms of that. So I think in the end of the day, that was the biggest learning that I have throughout the whole process here of uh, of not giving up too easily on an
Right.
idea, you know.
Yep. Yep. No, that's good. So a hypothesis is like a fruit.
Mhm.
Squeeze it till you can't squeeze it no more.
Exactly.
No, that's really good. I think it's because it's so easy to, oh, you got a positive win. Let's move on to the next hypothesis. Or this one was really negative. Let's scrap that. Obviously, we had a terrible idea. Um, and instead of pressing through, and especially with like bad ideas, bad ideas can be so valuable because you can learn so much. You can identify uh, something that you added that clearly was detrimental to the user experience. Clearly, whatever you did, whether it's removing or adding something or changing something, that change was super impactful. And so, I guess one of my follow up questions would be when you're looking at squeezing a hypothesis after version one, after you run that test, whether it's a positive and it's statistically significant winner or loser, what do you do to extract more value? Like you've got a winner. What can that version two look like? How do you get to version two? How do you get to version three?
Yeah, we what we try to do is like deep dive the results from the version one to try to understand uh, not exactly the real number of it, like but like try to get an ideas of what might happen in terms of that. Sometimes if you see the right number, you don't have like statistic value to it because when you break down, the numbers start to get smaller and it's hard for you to get the number. But that helps you get already some point of views. So what? Why? Why that maybe sometimes an experiment worked really well for a specific audience and didn't work for another one.
Right.
So what could have happened there? And then we go back sometimes to the hypothesis, uh, to the link where the test was developed. Try to experiment it. Try to use it like the test again. Think about it, the process. Maybe sometimes even doing research on top of it. Say, okay, that's the idea. What other research that we can do? What can
Right.
we ask the client? But keep poking like that idea, like in terms of uh, what's next. I always try to do that to my team. I say, okay, we can't finish an A/B
Right.
test, like an
Right.
analysis, without a what's next
Yep.
answer.
That's so true.
So and then and we will work from that. So and then this is something that we need to do. Everyone needs to do at the end of the test. And then
Right.
when we go back to it and we put it then back on our roadmap, uh, to decide. Then we will decide if we will prioritize the version 2 of that experiment over another hypothesis, depending on the audience, depending on how how small was the audience that we found the what next, or not, or like to prioritize it. But it's like a mix. We don't have like one specific way of going to from version 1 to version 2. But the idea is spend time on trying to gather all the information you have and to do this provocation, like to go there and say, look, there's something else that needs to be done.
Right.
Search for references, uh, do another research or deep dive the numbers, but try to understand what's going, because it will never work for everyone. Always will have like a specific group that could have like a negative impact in
Yep.
terms of that project. So the idea is to try to understand that.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And so going from version 1 to version 2 and squeezing more out of that hypothesis, you'd say dive into segments, new versus returning, look at channels. What was there any ones that performed way better or way worse? And then trying to understand uh, why that happened, which can oftentimes draw you back to research and other insights that you gathered, or maybe you have to restart the research process, or gather some more qualitative um, data through what you're kind of what you've learned in this test. That's that that definitely makes sense. I have an example, which I'd love to hear an example too on your end. Do you have any examples that you can think of where you had a test or hypothesis, you ran a test, it was a clear winner or it was a clear loser, and then you squeezed that hypothesis for more and had a version 2 or a version 3? Is there any particular examples that you can think of for that?
Yeah. We, for instance, we had like imagine that we have like an internal search page result, that's like a product list there. And then what we wanted to do is like we didn't have, uh, going back, we had the research page. Uh, if the user wanted to filter the options, they had to click in a filter button and open all the options. But depending on the category, you have like a lot of filters, different type of filters. And then we understood that some of these filters were the most clicked ones for each one of the categories, for instance. So what we decided was to move from inside the filter area, uh, the filter that was used the most, to be like a shortcut on the top of the product list, so it would be easier for them to filter it without going throughout all the steps of clicking, moving, choosing, rolling back and down, and up and down, and then so on. So we did this, what we call like was a quick filter inside the search bar, over on the top of the list. So what we did is we test that uh, using brands, for instance, for all the products, all the pages, because when you look in general, logo, the brands were the most clicked filter for that specific brand that we were working inside Magalu. So okay, so we did that. The total result, it was good. We could see improvement on that. But then what we did was, okay, but did it work the same for all the departments internally? And then when we started to deep dive the numbers, we checked that for uh, the our most selling products over there, it worked really well, and that's why the general result was good. But when we look into the long tail, The products we don't sell that much. Depending on the category, the brand didn't have like a huge effect on the users. So we had a few clicks. We had like we lost. We had less sales in terms of the total that we saw the categories and so on. So uh, deep dive in that, we could understand that uh, we could generate like an increase in sales by generalizing it for the brands. But when we deep dive, we discovered out that for some categories we could use other filters to be on that position, like I don't know, size, like or maybe uh, uh, weight or height, depending on the product. So there are other type of filters that work best, and then we could increase our conversion and our sales by splitting in uh, different filters by category instead of making like a general choice on that. So that was an example that in the end of the day we could just implement it, but studying we found out that we could do more and then improve even more our results.
You broke up your search, the performance of users on your search results by the category or product they're purchasing, right? And when you did that, you were able to see that brands, the brand filter option didn't perform as well on some of the on other categories, right? And so then you were able to take it a step further um, and squeeze more out of that hypothesis. I mean, I love that concept. I think it's huge. Like uh, being able to identify what's next at the end of a test is it's an acquired skill that only comes in time.
Yeah.
You just have to have loads of tests under your belt to even be able to identify what comes next. And there's loads of research that's involved underneath that to extract more value out of that hypothesis. So I really love that concept, and I noted it here. Hypothesis is like fruit. Um, gonna steal that one. I'll make sure every single time everybody knows that that came from you. Uh, Anything else that you wanted to kind of highlight about your different roles when you transitioned from an agency owner to working in house with Magaloo? Was there anything that, looking back, you would have done differently as an agency owner now that you're in house? Like, has there been things like that agency owners or those working at an agency could learn from the different roles that you've been in and your experience both in house and as an agency owner?
Uh, yeah. I think that's something that uh, for me, like as a, I love the to be a practitioner about CRO. I like the area a lot. So for me, the most interesting projects were the ones that I had the more data involved on it, and data from different levels inside the company, strategic data. So as an agency owner, sometimes when you sign a contract, you don't have access to a lot of data from the company. Maybe they'll give you like the analytics tool, maybe like a heat map tool, but it's very hard for them to give you access to their bottom line results, for instance, like or even like the impact that it had on logistics, on costs, and then on the I don't know payment methods analysis where they can like lose money depending on which payment methods the users are using the most. So there are a lot of other variables when you are in a retailer, for instance, that like as an agency you don't have access to it, and that make you sometimes blind in terms of making the better decisions. So as my advice for an agency that like is to build this relationship with the C level or directors or the executive level that you are discussing with, and trying to prove them the importance of having this access to these tools. That your goal is not to share that to the market or so on, definitely not, but to improve the decision making.
Right.
And then, and because of that, sometimes because we lack this deep analysis, uh, we sometimes don't understand why that we did a test, it got the good results, and why the retailer sometimes is not implementing it. What happens there? What's going on in the middle? And then, and it's not always clear. Uh, I don't know if this is something local here, if you feel the same in
Yep.
US. But in Brazil, I had a lot of this feeling that sometimes, like, oh my God, what, like, why? Why? It's
Right.
here, it's the result. We have
Yep.
like but we don't understand the bigger picture of it
Yep.
because of that, because we don't have access to that information. And that makes the whole difference when you are internal, in house, and you have access to it, and you start to connect all the different tools into your test and get the results and finding out exactly what might be the bottlenecks throughout the whole process from the consumer to buy it until delivers at his house, it's something completely different. So
Right. Yeah. No, that's really good advice. Um, it's so true that in running eNavi, we get limited picture on that ecom merchant, and we get access to their analytics, and we build out some infrastructure for them so we can grab qualitative data too, but we don't have all of the different data that they have, and oftentimes the merchant doesn't even have all the data that they need.
yes,
And so having that full picture of data though can help you better prioritize uh, test ideas, better prioritize hypothesis, better prioritize those insights where you're ultimately focusing the problems that you see. Makes it way better for you to truly be an extension of, of that company's team, and to provide them the most value when you can have that full picture. Otherwise, you're just limited into your area, and so that's huge. That's a really good advice there.
exactly. Because I still feel that CRO is an operational area.
Yeah.
At least over here in Brazil, it's treated a lot as like an operational area, not a strategic area that you could leverage your results massively, like in terms of like, look, that let's put the biggest ideas of the company to test and not the small ones, like sometimes what I see a lot and over the years is exactly that. It's like the small ideas, like the button, like the menu and so on. Okay, that's okay. You can test, but the big decisions are still making directly without an experimentation program, like studying, understanding the problem, like the solution. So, uh, and it's important. And I think for the agencies, it's important to present that, like the data, the importance of getting all this data together to collect to make the better decisions, because that could be the difference in terms of getting these contracts or maybe keeping the contracts later on, because it's where the value is, like and not changing the color of the button or changing a specific content in a landing page. I think
Right.
they definitely give gains as well, but in a much less, I don't know, on a less scale there.
Right. Right.
Lower.
Yeah. Experimentation can go beyond just the user experience. There's many layers to where it can uh, be utilized and where it should be utilized. So um, I love that idea of it being more just part of an organization's operations than like a strategic role, but it plays a much bigger role when it's part of operations, because it's uh, a core part of how the organization operates and thinks about things is through the lens of experimentation. So that's really good. Well, I really enjoyed the time that we had together. I think the one thing that I'll leave our listeners to is always think what's next when it comes to experimenting. When a test is done, ask yourself what's next, because like Eduardo said here, a hypothesis is like a fruit, and squeeze it until you can't squeeze any more juice out of it. And so, love that concept. Really enjoyed our time together. Thanks again, Eduardo.
Thanks a lot, Anthony. It was a pleasure talking to you. Talk to you again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.